So thank you all for sticking with us to the very end of this workshop. But this is the intention of how we've staged the themes, the organization of this workshop kind of culminates from kind of work on the ground, things that challenges and topics that you are dealing with in terms of adaptation, and what is your decision space in dealing with that? What do you need from your partners? Those kinds of things, and then we moved up to local governments, nonprofit organizations, tribal, and now we are going to end with the national leadership. So that's what this panel's about. And before I talk any further, I'm going to go back on script. All right, so we've spent the last 2 days exploring many topics associated with adapting cross-boundary land and natural resource stewardship and restoration in the face of dynamic changes. Climate change is obviously a really big topic. It's a title of our workshop. But as we've heard, there's a lot of other changes going on: demographics, land use, economics, laws, policies, and programs. A cross-cutting theme in the panel presentations and in the breakout discussions you all have had is the concept of decision space. The types of decisions different people have to make and the factors that facilitate or frustrate those decisions. Now, nearly all of the work that eventually touches land and natural resources in this country, regardless of land ownership, is influenced by federal law, policies, and programs. Obviously, those of you that work on federal lands, all 640 million acres of it that is owned and managed by the federal government, is influenced. There are myriad laws, regulations, policies governing decisions and shaping your decision space. But even those of you who work on and manage non-federal lands, federal law and regulations shape and constrain your decisions as well. Okay. Not to mention the billions of dollars that flow through various conservation and disaster recovery programs administered by federal land agencies and the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and the myriad grant proposal, matching, and reporting requirements that come along with those programs. And you know what I'm talking about, those of you that deal with those pass-through dollars. It can often feel like those laws, policies, and programs flow like a manna from above, from smoke-filled back rooms in Congress and faceless, cold calculating government officials. And that leadership at the national level are disconnected and clueless from the realities on the ground, right? It just can seem like that. Like, why are we dealing with this rule, with this matching requirement, with this reporting requirement? Who's making these rules? The leaders, I'm here to tell you that the leaders at the national level are real people. They are generally kind and compassionate, but they also care deeply about our land, air, water, and natural resources, and for the people who steward those resources. And I think we saw that caring and compassion from Congressman Joe Neguse when he joined us here on Tuesday afternoon. So this final panel of the workshop features 2 more leaders from the national level. I'm going to introduce them to you. On your far right is Joan Mooney. Joan currently serves as Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy, Management, and Budget at the Department of the Interior. Now, working back in time, Joan has previously served as President and CEO of the Faith and Politics Institute from 2015 to 2022. In this capacity, she worked closely with lawmakers, federal officials, and Board Chair Emeritus Congressman John Lewis at the intersection of their values and public service to advance constructive collaboration. In 2020, Joan established the Institute's John Robert Lewis Scholars and Fellows Program in his memory. From 2009 to 2014, she served as Assistant Secretary of Veterans Affairs for Congressional and Legislative Affairs, leading congressional efforts to secure significant increases in agency funding for veterans and execution of programs. Mooney also served as the Congressional Chief of Staff, including for an Oregon Member of Congress from 1997 to 2009. So long career in public service. She earned her bachelor's degree in government and politics from George Mason University, and I love this, and a Master of Applied Positive Psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. That's a degree program I would love to check out sometime. This is Harrell. Meryl is the Deputy Undersecretary. Sorry, let's please welcome Joan. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Harrell is the Deputy Undersecretary for Natural Resources and the Environment, otherwise known as NRE, in the U.S. Department of Agriculture, where she works closely with the USDA Forest Service. Meryl previously served in NRE for 8 years during the Obama-Biden administration, including serving as Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor to the Undersecretary. And I believe that's when we first met. I was looking actually back at my notes. It was March of 2010 during the revising process for the Forest Service's National Forest Planning Rules. So it was great to meet, and then we've had a chance to interact and communicate over the years, and I've always appreciated your seriousness and thoughtfulness that you bring to these issues, and for your friendship. So let's see, Harrell served as the executive, prior to returning back to USDA, Harrell served as the executive director of the Southern Appalachian Wilderness Stewards, or SAWS, that's a cool acronym, and founded a consulting practice advising nonprofit organizations, foundations, and government agencies working to conserve and manage public lands, addressing wildfire risk, building social and economic opportunity through outdoor recreation, and increased equitable access to careers in conservation. Meryl previously worked on public lands issues at the Wilderness Society in Washington, D.C. Meryl received her J.D. law degree from the Yale Law School and her undergraduate degree in geoscience and environmental studies from Princeton University. She can often be found hiking on trails in our national forest with her family. So let's please welcome Meryl. All right. So that's sort of my general throat clearing. So the purpose of this panel is to explore the opportunities and the sideboards of national level agency leaders, what they face to achieve cross-boundary landscape resiliency objectives like we've all been talking about for the last couple of days. In other words, what is your decision space at the national leadership level to facilitate adaptation to rapid changes affecting landscapes and ecosystem services? So I'd like to kick off by having each of you describe for the audience, what is your position? Like, where do you sit in the chain of command, so to speak, so that we all kind of have an idea of, like, where that is, and then just talk a little bit about the scope of your duties and responsibilities and your decision space, the types of major decisions that you kind of oversee. Sound good? Do you want to start, Joan?
Hello. Can you hear? Is this good? Okay, thank you. Thanks so much. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you, and I've been here in and out over the last couple of days, and these gatherings for me are really what sustains me in the work that I do. So I am in a position right now where I am in charge of policy management and budget at the Department of Interior. So in the org chart, it's the secretary. The deputy secretary is the chief operating officer by statute, and all those general operations for the Department of the Interior are in my office, and I direct and manage them. So it's all management, all policy, from everything from management from the Office of Wildland Fire is in mine, to aviation services, to law enforcement, to emergency management, all the way out to the Indian Arts and Crafts Board. We run the second largest museum complex in the United States. We also have everything from natural resource revenue, all of our tax collection. We are the second largest revenue collector in the federal government, right behind the IRS. So I'm saying that so you know that this is a sliver of what my office is responsible for. But to me, it's an incredibly important sliver. And when I'm doing budgets, which I've just been in and out of calls because we're preparing our FY25 formulation. At the same time, we're executing the 23 budget. At the same time, 24 is working its way through testimony and hearings. But to me, hearing the challenges you're facing on the ground are going to help me better not only execute those 23 funds, but continue to advocate for 24, and most importantly, set the vision out for 25. So I'm grateful to be here, and I'm with a true subject matter expert who is my dear partner in crime, Harrell, who has real depth. I like to say we're a mile wide and like a millimeter deep, but it's really important for me to know and understand all the challenges you face, whether it's, and I say this, it's kind of silly, I get complaints about credit card filings and all kinds of things to make processes, grants, management, you name it, to make things efficient. My goal for you is that you would all have the least amount of time spent on administration and management, and you have the greatest flexibility that we can responsibly offer for you to do the critical work functions that you all do.
Thanks, Joan. Meryl?
Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here, and I'm so bummed that I was not able to be here the last 2 days, but even just today, being able to hear all of the conversation was fantastic. I think the intersection between policy, practice, and science is so critical, and so really being able to hear kind of what's on everyone's minds, and hopefully we can build on that and build on all the dialogue and conversation through this time we have together right now. So I have the opportunity to be in the Office of Natural Resources and Environment at USDA. So I work very closely with my colleagues at the Forest Service, and many of you are in the room. And so any issue that comes up that's related to the National Forest System or our international programs or our wildland fire response, our Job Corps centers, our research program, all of that kind of comes up, and I have the opportunity to work with Forest Service leadership on all of those issues, as well as my colleagues across the U.S. Department of Agriculture, including the Farm Production and Conservation Mission area. So I get to work with colleagues who are working in NRCS, with rural development, and with research, and then with all of you through partnerships and collaboration. And then my co-collaborator here, Joan, we get to work together in many spaces, including the Wildfire Mitigation and Management Commission, and a few folks who are involved in that are here as well. The Wildfire Interagency Working Group, which is 17 different departments, agencies, and offices that all have a part of wildfire resilience, as well as the Wildland Fire Leadership Council. And I know Mike and Katie and others are here as well. So we get to co-collaborate with many of you in all of those spaces.
Fantastic. So what right now in these days, what's most exciting to you? Like what do you, just kind of at your level, but also as you traverse across the country, interact with colleagues from the field level up to the national level, what's really exciting right now?
I would say for me, it's the work we're doing currently with all the commissions and the interagency working groups that we're doing on wildfire management and mitigation. We have these couple of once-in-a-generation investments in infrastructure in the country. And I know that we came to this point in time where people had challenges getting resources to do the work. And now the money is available, the resources is available to do this work. That is just absolutely critical. So this is exciting, and the bipartisan infrastructure law and the passage of that was wonderful. The president's 24 budget, where we're making good on the promises of workforce, to our workforce, making bill, in essence, the increases, in essence, permanent in a different way, and we think a better way. And also to be able to have the opportunity to inform through the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission without the constraints of being concerned about funding, we have the ability to make recommendations to the Congress of ways to improve the federal work in this area without constraints of funding. We're always balancing funding needs, and we're always balancing, where we are and where we fit in the federal government. This enables us to go out there and suggest anything that we think would make the systems better.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that systems point. I'm really excited about the opportunity for connections that we have right now. We're making so many connections in new and different ways. We're connecting across formerly siloed areas, whether it's temporally or jurisdictionally or areas of practice. We're connecting climate resilience and equity and environmental justice and wildfire risk reduction. We are collaborating in new ways and finding ways both at the system level and the practice level to daylight and address systemic barriers that have prevented equitable access and have prevented effectiveness and impact. So, we have the opportunity with the resources to test out things that we've been wanting to try, that we've been advocating for, practitioners have been saying are needed. So we have this opportunity, this moment in time, to bring all of those threads together and demonstrate what can be done with that kind of connection and that kind of investment and those different relationships. We were talking about relationships earlier, to move away from the transactional and really build those transformational relationships and impacts that hopefully can continue to be carried forward.
Maybe staying on that thread, we heard from Chris Swanston about the new climate adaptation plan and a climate risk viewer that tries to bring in more of a decision support system those concepts and attributes, but also then to help inform where we might want to look at in priority investments and those kinds of things. Can you talk a little bit more about how that is relevant to folks in the field and how they can help inform that viewer?
Yes, I would be thrilled to talk about that. I'm super excited about the climate risk viewer. I think one thing that's really been transformative over the last decade is the ability to spatially visualize values and risks and be able to use that to help inform strategic decision making. So this climate risk viewer, which was released 2 weeks ago, developed by the Forest Service, it's a beta version. And it brings together 28 high quality data sets that have never been connected in this way before, 69 map layers. And it includes 3 different things. The first is a number of different values that are present on the landscape. The second is climate risks and vulnerabilities that might be impacting those values. And then the third is, and this is limited to Forest Service lands, but current management intent and direction. We've got a lot of material plan components in land management plans. What's currently being activated in terms of management direction, and how does it relate to both the values that we're trying to conserve and protect? And that also includes social and community values as well, and the risks we're seeing, the changing vulnerabilities to those values. So there's sort of those three aspects that haven't been overlaid in the same way. So I'm excited for everyone in this room. Please go play with those layers. And then connected with that is an advance notice of proposed rulemaking that's currently out for public comment right now. That asks a series of questions, many of which you all have been talking about and asking over the past few days, including what does it look like to truly think about climate resilience when we're looking at the sort of increasing rates of change and the differential change that's happening across the system. What does adaptive management look like? There's questions about performance indicators, planning and management at multiple scales and across boundaries. The very first question is about how do we truly braid Western science and indigenous knowledge and bring that forward right from the start in terms of our resilience planning and adaptation. Talks about how are we looking at connected ecosystem values? Ask for all of your input, and how are we thinking about connected ecosystem values and resilience, both planning and practice? It asks for feedback on social resilience and how can we recognize and invest in underserved communities and supporting climate resilience and adaptation across jurisdictional boundaries. How do we expand and build on the co-stewardship work we've been advancing with tribes? And how do we collaborate with partners differently to think about climate resilience? So there's a whole host of questions in there. It's a 60-day comment period. Really invite and hope all of you will share some feedback. There's a pathway for feedback on the climate risk viewer as well. You know, I was talking with Allie on the way here, how do we visualize capacity? Because that's going to be a key part of how we can resource impact. How do we, what are other data layers that might be out there, and how do we use them effectively to inform data, and support informed decision making? So please take a look at all of those things.
Good. So where would that rule eventually live, and who does that apply to?
So the inquiry right now invites a suite of options. It basically is an open-ended question to what would be effective for informing climate resilience and the practice of resilience at multiple different levels. And that could include a number of different tools, tactics, practices, policies. It's an open invitation for, we have a lot of direction already. We have direction in the 2012 planning rule. We have direction in the climate adaptation plan that Chris was able to highlight and share, in the wildfire crisis strategy, in all of these different areas of opportunity. So the idea is really recognizing and building on all of that. What can we learn from all of you that would help us complement that, so that policies and practice are better connected and more effective, and more equitable? Sounds good.
I want to stop there because there was a lot there. So this announcement for the announcement for rulemaking, if it goes through, has transformational change, especially for the Forest Service and National Forest systems. And so those of you who are working for the Forest Service on those lands, or even areas adjacent to those, the tribal communities, indigenous communities. So what questions do you have? Matt Thompson. We got to give him a microphone. Okay.
So this is a question that actually came up in the morning session that I didn't have a good answer to, and someone in the audience graciously saved me. But it's about prospects for rulemaking, and maybe at the high levels how you see it. So we talked about treating pod boundaries to create like a system of fuel breaks, and how and whether people are using the categorical exclusion. And then an hour later, I got an email in my inbox that USDA just announced $63 million to go to some Western states to prioritize and create fuel breaks. So it's very salient right now. One of the questions was the degree to which people could or should leverage the categorical exclusion versus go through the more formal rulemaking process. And the feedback we got was that in some cases, using the CADX opportunity was not viewed favorably. So I'm just wondering at like your level, when you send those funds out to these landscapes and say these are to create the system of fuel breaks, leveraging your cross-boundary planning and all the rest, are you providing any guidance on whether to leverage that categorical exclusion or not, or do you leave that kind of more up to local discretion, or just how do you think that's going to unfold? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And I was able to catch a good chunk of your presentation, so there are lots of things I want to follow up with you on and ask questions about. So the Secretary just announced additional investments in fuels treatments and breaks related to pods. So it's really exciting to be able to start to really invest and put into practice or build on the great pods work and collaboration that many folks have been doing across the system. And I think the full set of tools are available. Deputy Chief Chris French has sent out some direction that helps to describe and make available to folks in the field all of the different options. And I think, as the question demonstrated earlier, some of it's going to be about what do those relationships look like, and what kind of collaboration has been in place, and then how can you best utilize the full set of tools in your toolbox to most effectively deliver on the work that is in front of us all. So that's part of the capacity question too. Like, how are we investing in that outreach? One of the great things about pods is that it does bring that community process, that planning together, so that there is connection between what are the priorities and what are the values at risk and what are the best opportunities for fire containment and being able to safely introduce prescribed fire and support firefighter safety and fire response safety. So bringing that collaborative process together and being able to invest in that in more places, I think will help unlock the availability of all the tools that we have to be able to deliver on that work effectively, and with full recognition and following all of the appropriate laws and policies to do so.
Well, one more. Does this relate to the climate risk viewer and the announcement for rulemaking, or is this a different question? Yeah, I'm going to keep us on track. Go ahead.
Just do it. Listen to the question, and you can tell me to sit down and shut up. So I'm Jeff Morse
got a
at
bigger
the Rocky
microphone.
Mountain Research Station, and a question about climate mitigation and maybe how much that comes into play here. There was a district ranger who said, without targets, you're not going to make any progress. So, what about a target for stabilized carbon? So in particular, or maybe just in general, any thoughts about climate change mitigation and what you see the opportunities there?
Yeah, I think there's significant opportunities, and Chris Swanston, I think, says it best where he talks about optimization. So how are we looking at optimizing these different values for climate benefits and for resilience? And one of the things that I think the climate risk viewer will help us look at, and I know that folks across the board are engaged in, is where are these carbon stores? How are we looking at forest carbon? How are we looking at soil carbon? What are the impacts of some of the stressors that we're seeing on the system? And what are the opportunities that we have to put practices into place to increase resilience and resistance, so that we can maintain and conserve those carbon stores and advance climate mitigation. And so looking at where those opportunities are and looking at where those intersecting values are, and then what are our opportunities to put practices into place that will advance that.
That sounds very good. Thank you for staying on track, Mr. Morissette, Dr. Morissette. Well, I want to kind of keep threading on this question of like the performance metrics, targets, and those kinds of things. So that's another big theme that came out of this morning's talk. And I know that both the wildfire crisis strategy has some fairly ambitious, targets in terms of large acreages. I know that the Department of the Interior also has a 5-year monitoring and maintenance plan that's kind of corresponds to the surge in funding. I'm sure you have heard over the many years, but certainly this has been a theme at this conference, that the current performance metrics don't really align with any kind of strategy or outcome or something that makes sense. So we're talking about like acres treated or volume produced or something like that. What's kind of the thinking that's going on, at those levels where you have to think about metrics that can be measured reliably and then scaled up from a diversity of places from Alaska to Florida? So just some thoughts about the performance metric conversation that we've had.
I could start, and then Meryl can give clarity. I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges, right? We've got this historic investments, and we all want to get the money out on the ground to the best possible place as soon as we possibly can. Sometimes in that process, you're making haste, and our goal is to make haste carefully and thoughtfully. And so, I think we're all evaluating where we are and what the ultimate goals are. And I would look at this, and we talk about this. Ketty Spomer is here from the Office of Wildland Fire. We talk about this ourselves. Are we doing the right things? Are we making it easy enough for people to both measure it, but also are we giving them flexibilities to do what they think is necessary overall? So it's probably the one thing that there are many things that keep me up at night, but one of those is, are we investing wisely for the long haul, and are we making people move out so quickly that whether or not we're doing the right thing in the right time? So, Meryl.
Yeah, I love how you put that. And scaling up and scaling differently are not the same thing. So how are we thinking about how we're doing both, how we're scaling up and we're scaling differently? And what does it look like to have outcome-based performance measures that capture both of those things? And, for example, are we actually enabling different access and investment patterns? Are we addressing systemic barriers? How are we, somebody asked a question earlier about social indicators and social measures. What are we doing to invest in relationships and invest in collaboration, invest in capacity building? Because we know that's a critical part of success. So thinking about that, and then thinking about, we've had these output measures that have sort of been proxies for outcomes, but they aren't actually the outcomes. So how do we shift to being able to really understand how to measure those outcomes? And then Matt's point earlier, like, how do we measure progress towards those outcomes? It may be, for example, to fully get to maintenance mode for a particular area for wildfire condition, there need to be multiple entries. And we need to be able to show that we're making progress. As Joan says, we need to show that we're having an impact with the resources we've been given. So how can we show progress along the way, both in terms of the outcomes we're trying to achieve, acres mitigated, or outcomes for the water, for the wildlife, for community resilience and protection, and mitigation, as well as progress along the way, and the social connections and social indicators for outcomes that we want to be investing in.
Yeah, so that's great that there's an openness now and really kind of critical reflection about how we need to do this differently. What do you need from folks in this room? Like people in the field, you have research scientists, people that do the monitoring, you have NGOs. What would you need from them as a way to tell that story with clarity and with conviction to the people with the purse strings, Congress and the appropriations people? What could be helpful for you from them?
Well, I can start easily. I mean, it's why we come to events and gatherings like this. Meryl's heard me say this before, it's pretty hard to fix things with the 2,500-mile screwdriver. I need to know what you're facing on the ground at your level, so that I can take it up and build in flexibilities, potentially get more money. The goal is to make it easier and easier to do the work. It really breaks my heart when someone comes and brings to me a challenge that we could have easily potentially mitigated, and that it's causing you challenges in the field in doing your work. There are some things that maybe we can't avoid, but rather than telling people what they can't have, I'd much rather tell people what they can have, or hearing what you need and finding a way to get you there.
Yeah, I agree. The folks in this room, this is an amazing collection of knowledge holders, and so please share that. You were talking about what's sort of the area of impact, and sometimes I think the area of impact that you have is much broader. The area of influence is greater than you might think, and there are a number of ways and spaces that we all could be learning from what you've been really thinking about and studying in terms of these performance measures and all of the other things that Joan was mentioning. So in the comment period that's open right now is a specific question about performance indicators and outcome-based performance indicators. So send it all our way through that comment period that's open now. That would be really fantastic and helpful because you've thought about a number of these things and you'll have suggestions for what would be effective or more effective measures. I think it'll be a continual learning, but what are some thoughts and suggestions that we could build on now? The Wildfire Mitigation and Management Commission also has the opportunity to recommend to Congress different ways of asking for reports from the federal agencies and assessing impact. So that's another opportunity to share some thoughts through the commission. And then the last thing is just on storytelling, and folks were talking about that earlier. Sometimes we're just really not great at being able to tell the story of impact. We're all very focused on getting the practice out or doing the work on the ground, but it matters for people, it matters for places. How can we be really conveying that in a different way so that we can be translating the numbers to actual change that people are experiencing as a result?
Great. So, you know, there's a lot of boundary spanners in this room, people that organize collaboratives, the RVCCs of the world, right? Us, the Swearies, that can be aggregators of those stories and those different ways of telling the story, not just with the numbers, but the context around the numbers and what those numbers mean towards a larger objective. Because if we just provide numbers, there is no context. And when there's no context, then there's no meaning to the work that we're doing. So I think it sort of compels us as a community to think about creative ways and putting those together, okay? So that's the subject of further conversations that we can all walk out the door to start working on next week, next month, and those kinds of things. So this isn't just a one-way, you know, panel we're hearing. That you're hearing that they want to hear from you. They want to help make the work easier. And so I would take a hold of that, right? And take that opportunity and seize it, and when we have pathways to do that. Capacity came up in your response. It's come up here. I want to touch on that. Not just touch on it. I want to dig deeper into a couple of types of capacity that have come up. One is Matt Thompson stole it from Chris in one of the breakout groups. I'm going to steal it here. We're going to lose attribution at some point, but we got to get the attribution right. But it's the quote is the saturation of priorities, and I'm also going to add when you also have a saturation of priorities, you also have a saturation of expectations and pressure. At the same time, you have a dilution of capacity. This workforce issue is now systemic. And I know it's something that is now known at the national level. We've heard congressional testimonies. What are some of the activities and initiatives that are going on at the national level in both your departments to address that?
So on workforce capacity, I think we're all trying to build it up. You know, it's challenging we have very low unemployment, really challenging to get people in. Our goal is to make, you know, federal service as attractive an option and make it easier. I think in wildland fire, the president has certainly gone above and beyond through the bipartisan infrastructure law in support of our workforce, and then also in the 24 budget. So for us, we're working on ways to make federal workforce more attractive to people, and we have our work cut out for us as we bring people also back into post-pandemic reality. What is it now? How do we need to change our thinking based on a new environment, a new world? So.
And is it more than wages? Is it, we have a housing crisis now. There's health. What are some of the other kind of, if you can dig a little bit more deeply into that?
Well, we do have housing in our 24 budget, and these are challenges that we're facing overall in gateway communities. Is there is there housing available to people? What are we doing to be able to hire locally? How can we fill the needs? How can we get some waivers and some changes from the Office of Personnel Management in the work that we're doing to keep our workforce around? We're headed into a period where, the baby boomers are retiring. We have a lot of subject matter experts who are absolutely critical to this, and we need to pass that wisdom on to the next generation of leaders that are coming up. We know that the next phase of the workforce, we're a diverse nation and we're becoming more diverse. We've got to bring more representative of the general population into this work. That is another thing that keeps me up at night, is how do we prepare the workforce to take over some of these land management bureaus and the work that we do. It's absolutely critical that we be thinking ahead 10 and 20 years on how we're going to have the workforce necessary to do all these important functions.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and Joan's been an incredible leader in firefighter pay equity and health and mental health. And Secretary Vilsack and Undersecretary Wilkes and the Chief Moore are very focused on that as well. Like, how are we making sure that people are receiving the pay they deserve and they have the access to mental health support and all of the support in terms of housing and living, being able to do the work and be supported in the work. And that's true across our workforce. So in addition to thinking about on the federal side, how are we building up all of the support for all of the folks who are out there trying to advance the ball and do the work and give all of everything that's needed, how are we thinking about our collective capacity? Because we know that's something that we're all facing together, and we don't want to be Pac-Manning each other's capacity and resources. So how can we actually be able to connect across and be able to access capacity and knowledge and skill sets where they are and be mutually supportive? So I think that's one area of shared investment and opportunity, another area of shared investment and opportunity. And then the third is around sort of that pipeline development. And I know you were hearing earlier from the Ancestral Lands Conservation Corps. I'm obviously a big proponent of providing paid work experience that also accomplishes mission critical work on the ground to build that next generation, build that workforce, provide those opportunities. And once we do that, we need accessible architecture to be able for there to be equitable pathways for those participants into conservation and resilience and restoration careers across the board. So we are, on the federal side, working to map out all of the systemic barriers that we know pop up along the way and get at each of those, try and attack each of those barriers. So we're breaking that down and creating more equitable access to be able to bring that workforce in. But we need to be doing that together and creating that shared architecture for those opportunities to build the workforce.
That sounds great. That's a great example. And it touches on the other type of capacity that's come up is the collaborative capacity. I think you talk more generally about collective capacity. One of the things that we've talked about, and I think the previous panel right before lunch, really highlighted the importance of kind of, especially in the forestry, natural resources, fire world, that's really been the province of singular land management agencies, and now we see that this is a problem that those agencies can't solve alone. And so we're now seeing, a huge diversity in non-governmental organizations in particular that are filling in those gaps and really being those nodes and boundary spanners for collaboration. And yet those NGOs are ephemeral. They really are. They are very hand to mouth, or what am I trying to say? Just paycheck to paycheck. There is now increasing understanding and investment in sustaining that collaborative capacity and those conveners and organizations that do that. I think one of the challenges, from the ground that we've also heard is that, a lot of these grant programs, that were set up maybe in the 1978 Cooperative Forestry Act, for example, that passes through funding from the federal agencies of the state. They weren't set up for this kind of world, right? With that broad diversity. What are some of the, and you know, people have talked about the matching requirements and the reporting requirements, and they don't fit, right? There's a mismatch in the scale of the problem compared to the programs that we have. I think the Headwaters Economics had a great study that showed how the matching requirements alone creates a systemic structural bias in favor of the haves, the communities and the groups and the NGOs and the collaboratives that already have a lot of resources. I live in one of them, in the Front Range. You know, we have a luxury of collaboratives and NGOs and the ability to match. But there's a lot of other places that don't. So this is kind of a long-winded way of saying, what are some of the initiatives, and I know you've heard this, what are some of the initiatives that are being taken to try to modernize, I guess, that cooperative approach and really recognizing the importance of NGOs in this space?
So I can start. We fully embrace and recognize the importance of these relationships. We can't do it alone. We need partnerships. That is essential for how we're going to get anything done together. And those capacity investments are critical. Chief Moore last summer issued a letter of direction on partnerships that is intended to modernize our approach to partnerships. And it did a few things. It jettisoned substantial cash contribution requirements. It created an opportunity for match waivers. There's, at the request of any tribal government, all match is waived. Just needs a letter requesting the match waiver, recognizing the trust responsibilities and government-to-government relationship and the importance and value of co-stewardship and indigenous knowledge. It additionally allows for match waiver for groups that are serving underserved communities, to get at the point you're making around how are we investing, changing how our investment patterns look. And then also allows for, and that's at the chief level, at the station and regional forester level is the opportunity to waive match requirements down to 5%. And that's for two basic things. One is scale, to be able to increase the amount of work that can be accomplished. And two is who has access to those resources and changing opportunity for equitable access to partnerships and agreements with the Forest Service. I think, so that's a great opportunity. I think we're going to need to collectively invest in how that gets implemented. Because I think there still is a tension with, we're trying to advance resources quickly, there's still, a leg up for folks who already have capacity. So how are we looking intentionally at where we haven't had that connection? What are we doing to invest in process navigators and community navigators so that barriers that continue to exist for access, we're trying to address some of them systemically, but we also need, in relationship with others, to be able to actually to realize change in access, and to be able to make sure that it's not just project dollars that are getting distributed, it's the capacity investment as well that we're looking ahead to and building and intentionally investing in.
Okay, so I'm going to stop there and I'm going to turn it back to the audience. This isn't question time, this is like feedback time. How many of you now know about these like waiving requirements, and how many of you are taking advantage of it? What's your stories? Like, how is that working? Is it working well? Yeah. Sarah?
And let me add, because people are apparently intimidated by the word feedback. So how about guidance? What guidance would you like to give us?
Sarah, back.
I'm going to bellow.
Bellow.
So that you can hear me. Hi, I'm Sarah Beck. I'm with the Forest Service here at Fort Collins. And so I'm very familiar with the match waiver. I've been through it several times implementing. I can stop bellowing. So I'm implementing some post-disaster recovery. Okay. Anyway, here in the Northern Front Range. So we've gone through the process several times, requesting the regional forester waiving the match requirement down to 5%. And so that is, there were some hiccups initially until we figured out what that process was. And I'm going to flip it, as long as Tony doesn't get too mad at me here, and ask a question. And my question is the ability for tribes to waive a match requirement completely. Why is it that tribes have to request that, and why do they have to go all the way to the chief's office? This feels, on one hand, it feels like this is a great benefit that we're doing to potential tribal partners, but we're still saying, here you have to jump through these couple of hoops. And does the chief's office even have the match waiving process worked out yet? Because my understanding was that the process wasn't in place.
Yeah, appreciate all of those questions. So I was just at the Grants, Agreements, and National Partnership Office second annual gathering last week in Atlanta. And I can tell you that the leads, Gary and Cherno, for each of those areas are very focused on this and focused on learning and having the staff areas work together to make it operational. I agree for the tribal waiver, it needs to just be as clean as possible. And I think the thinking there was on the grants and agreements part was just to have a document that says this has been requested and it's been issued. But yeah, the intent is for it to not be onerous and not for it to be jumping hoops, but simply to just happen. So that was, I think, the intent of the chief's letter. So what that looks like in practice, again, it's in a learning phase. It's less than a year old. So folks are working through what does that actually look like in practice, and need to keep hearing things, how the experience is going, and the leaders of those director areas are working to make it work and make it happen. So, but do need that feedback so that we can learn and improve.
Mm-hmm. Learning and adaptive management. How about over there? Oh, John, yeah.
Thank you for your time, first of all, and appreciate the conversation. My topic is, again, on tribal opportunities and necessity to support in ways that go beyond agreements and authorities, but even into the shared stewardship co-management arena, where tribes are interested, able, or even not able to take on roles, responsibilities, programs of the Forest Service. If the workforce capacity is such a large challenge, there are other workforces in forest ranger district areas that include ancestral lands that the tribe would, I think, very much entertain an offer to co-management in regards to a recreation program, a fuels program, even suppression agreements where they're taking, response and initial attack as a tribal program. And then the capacity building that you mentioned, training, development, shared positions maybe between Forest Service, tribal, but also the other complex nuance to this arena is the relationship between the Forest Service and BIA, who has that trust responsibility for self-determination, just like the Forest Service does, but doing it in a manner that is consistent, understandable, in the most efficient approach to tribes to make them successful. And then the consideration for all the indirect cost support that is required for a tribe to assume a program or function. Facilities, equipment, overhead, indirect cost support. Those things, to me, is like, wow, if we could get that potentially organized in the Forest Service, there'd be awesome relationships. Tribes protect public land like no other entity. Just on the same level of the Forest Service, I believe. Thank you.
Thanks, John. And I think we can maybe continue on this track. I know we talked about this at lunch, and then maybe we can come back to a little bit more about the guidance, but I think this is a really important topic to keep going on. So do you want to kind of pick that up?
I agree. I think it's incredibly important, and we need to be doing more to both advance co-stewardship and grow towards co-management. Both of our departments are very committed to the joint secretarial order so that we can be advancing this work. And we've made progress over the last year. We were able to develop more than 70 co-stewardship agreements with tribes to do a whole host of things, including fuels and fuels management, watershed protection, food sovereignty, workforce development. Susan mentioned TFPA and the 638 authority, and I think we've been able to activate the ability to use TFPA and the 638 contracting that the Farm Bill gave us in 2018 in a much more robust way than we ever have in the past, and we need to do more. So we're fully committed to doing that and looking for, those conversations are happening right now. How can we build on progress that's been made, and how can we do more and do better? How can we also bring forward tribal rights, interests, perspectives, values, knowledge, priorities across the board from the planning stage to the implementation stage, and that includes how are we thinking about capacity, shared capacity investment. So couldn't agree more, incredibly important, and we're committed to continuing to build towards doing more and doing better.
And I can say on behalf of our secretary, Deb Holland, who's the first Native American Secretary of Interior, every day, every hour of every day, she's challenging us in every way to make good on the promises. Thank you.
Can we, I think it'd be beneficial for everybody to hear a little bit more about these co-stewardship agreements. How are they initiated? What do those agreements look like? What are some of those provisions? And then what's the next step even beyond that?
Sure. I think the team working on implementing the joint secretarial order had a lot of conversations about this, and ultimately the Forest Service and Department of Interior has slightly different tool set than we do at the moment. But the Forest Service has a range of vehicles, any one of which can advance co-stewardship. All of which can advance co-stewardship. That includes planning, that includes Good Neighbor Authority, it includes TFPA and 638 contracting within the Tribal Forest Protection Act. It includes co-stewardship. It includes partnership agreements and cooperative agreements that enable being able to both advance and integrate knowledge and priorities and values and rights, as well as invest in capacity and share responsibility, as you were mentioning. So the question is, what is the vehicle that is most relevant to the relationship that's being advanced and to the tribe through consultation? And how can we use all of those tools to be able to get at the co-management and then toward co-stewardship and then towards co-management? Reflecting what we're hearing from tribes in consultation with tribes. So it's a range of tools, and we need to be able to tap into all of them to be able to advance the work.
So it sounds like it's a case-by-case basis. It's case-by-case, place-by-place in a lot of respects.
It is, and wanting to be able to provide that shared work so that that there's something to build off of, right? We're not asking folks to recreate things across the board, but we're also not constraining what the opportunity is because we need to be able to be responsive to what is coming up in consultation.
Okay. And I guess I have a follow-up question too, and maybe this is something that we can all have a conversation as a community, but learning and adaptive management has been such a central theme here as well. In what ways are we investing in learning from these as case studies and bringing them back into adapting and improving those processes?
Yeah, I think one thing that comes to mind is the conversation that came up earlier about deconstructing collaborative processes to better understand where and how are we including tribes right from the start. So, and I know there's Susan and others in the room who are involved in thinking about how do we really braid Western science and indigenous knowledge together. There's a question that invites input on that as well in the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, which I'll keep mentioning because I want people to feed into it. But Professor Eisenberg shared as well, I think, a concept that I've been really thinking a lot about since I heard her say it around cultural humility. So how are we building that into, as we think about learning and adaptive management, how are we building that into our process?
Great. Anything else to add with this large topic area? Okay. We also, I didn't want to leave this notion of those changes in like match requirements and match waiving. If you have some good stories that you want to provide some feedback and guidance, please write them down, submit them, we'll collect them, and we'll make sure they're hand-delivered to the people that actually can make a difference, okay? So I know that there's some hands around, so jot them down, and we'll do our best to sort of aggregate them and summarize them in like a briefing paper or something. Sound good?
And as Meryl indicated, nothing changes policy better than a good story and some photographs. And a lot of times I think people wonder, with all the money going out there, and like I said, I'm in charge of the overall Department of Interior budget, which sometimes seems so massive, right? But if you bring it down to what has an impact on people's lives, it's more likely to get funding out of it. And also, when you highlight the problems and the challenges that you face, miraculously sometimes those obstacles can be removed, and it can't happen without your help.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Kind of want to bring us back to some of the overarching themes of the conference, which is around adapting to a climate-altered West, right? And also an important theme that we're all dealing with, I think, brings us all together is fire, right, as a unifier. And our opening night speaker was Steve Pine, the kind of noted historian that's written a lot about the story of fire here on the continent. And one of the things that he talked about was the notion is fire eventually integrates everything around it, right? And so it integrates the landscape, the ecosystems, it resets it. It also integrates people, right? It brings us together, and fire, and we all sit around campfires, right? And those kinds of things. So I did want to come back that kind of stitching together this grand challenge that I think all of us have really been, I think, grappling with in a lot of different ways. And I think for me personally has really elicited, a lot of conflicting emotions, from optimism and hope to, I remember sitting with some of you at lunch yesterday, and we got to talking, and we started going down this route, the spiral, and then we all just sat there in silence. And it didn't feel very good, but I think we need to sit with that feeling and accept it, right? That these are very daunting challenges. And so there's a lot of emphasis on fuels, on managing fuels. It's a thing that we generally can control in terms of the mitigation and the prevention side of things. But everything that then we've heard from science, folks like Chris Swanson and a lot of other people in this field, is that the climate is changing so rapidly that a lot of these major fires are going to overwhelm a lot of the work that we do in terms of managing fuels. And it really then gets to the question of like, what are our expectations? And how do we tell stories? And how do we have stories that are supported by good data and quantification that really maybe help set more realistic expectations for ourselves as land managers and practitioners, as scientists, as people that care about these things, but also to the public. Right? That we have created high expectations that we're going to solve this problem. We're going to prevent communities from burning down when, in many ways, there is very little empirical evidence that fuels work can really solve that. So I mean, this is I think, in a way, if we can manage those expectations and reset them for ourselves, those might be that gives us optimism, but it also communicates to our communities about what lies ahead of us. These are kind of big things, but it comes down to performance measures, it comes down to how we allocate resources and those kinds of things. So I was wondering if just kind of circulating around this broader topic of expectations management.
Wow, that's heavy. That's a lot.
That's me.
I'm even trying to think because we have these historic investments and we're trying to make hay while the sun shines on this, but we're also trying to look towards the future. I know we'd put substantial amounts of they're not even well, I shouldn't say that. We put substantial amounts into suppression, doing pre-fire planning, fuels management, post-fire recovery work. I think these are among the issues that the Commission, the Wildland Fire Council, the Interagency Working Group, we're all looking at how do we move, in addition to the investments we put into suppression, how do we invest overall? And I look forward to hearing from you all as we move through this process. But I don't know that I'm saying anything out of school, but when we started working on the commission, I think everybody had to take their blinders off to their own little world and the limits of finance and investment, and to think really broadly, to have some innovative solutions. And our goal, I think, is to do that. And after spending 6 months with this commission and this group of leaders, some of whom are in the room, I'm more invigorated and much more hopeful about where we are. I can say this having come from a military organization, Veterans Affairs, to hear now at Interior what people are doing is really protecting our resources for generations to come. There really is no difference in the work that you all are doing to preserve and protect ancestral lands, our homeland here. And when I look at going ahead and educating the public, everybody loves veterans. Everybody loves our military. The work that the public servants are doing in this realm is as important as any of that work that any of those servants are also performing. So when I think about where we're headed in educating the public about what we do, we really need to boost up this work and what's going on here so everybody understands, and that additional investments will come our way, and that there is a groundswell of support to do this work. That's what's going to give me hope, is engaging the public and making sure that these investments aren't a once-in-a-generation investment, but are a consistent year-over-year investment.
Yeah, I think that's important for all of us to be sharing, right? We're in this moment where we have more resources than we've ever had. We've been advocating for it, but we're also in a moment where we know we don't have anywhere near the resources we need for the scale of the problem. So how do we communicate effectively about both of those things? And continue to have optimism and hope. I do think, oftentimes there are these moments where we realize just how big the scale of the challenge is. And I think, there was the conversation about fatigue earlier, that's a real thing, right? Because we are working and working to make an impact, and we know just how big the challenge is. And we know we are having an impact. I think Christina's story earlier of, these treatments, we put these treatments in place, fires came through, fire behavior was mitigated, firefighters were able to go in safely, communities were protected, resources were protected, upstream drinking water is protected. So being able to come back to those areas of impact, and also, adjust our thinking on expectations. We're trying to restore fire-adapted landscapes. So how are we reconnecting with how those ecosystems have operated in the past, and and growing from that so that we're fully realizing the cohesive strategy. I'm looking for Mike and Katie here. Around each phase of that cohesive strategy and really kind of living with what does it mean to have resilience for both communities and our ecosystems in this environment we're in. And so what is our area? Each of us has an area of opportunity to have an impact there and are working towards that. So grounding into that impact and thinking about what it is we're working towards, being able to show that progress. So we're aligning those measures and those outcomes with being able to effectively tell how we are making a difference, and then what are we managing for? You know, those questions are, what are we treating these acres for? What are we building these relationships for? Because we're trying to have an impact on people, on communities, on natural resources for the long term. And being able to come back to that, I think is going to be really important for rejuvenation and energy, and we can come back excited to continue to work together for change.
Yeah, that's really good. I think that as I know the initial, at least on the Forest Service side, the initial tranche of funding were really focused on a community protection, right? So the idea was we're going to reduce fire exposure to those communities. This next tranche has broadened that, right? It does have an overlay of water resources, of cultural indigenous lands, other values. What can we anticipate coming down the pipe, so to speak? And that might mean that then everywhere is a priority, and that might be okay, but what's sort of the end game for kind of these where this is going in terms of adding those values on that we're focused on?
Well, I think it's a good question, and I think having those additional layers that informed the FY23 investments that Undersecretary Wilkes and Chief Moore were able to highlight here in Colorado, of where our tribal lands, where our underserved communities, where our municipal watersheds, where areas of importance for connected ecosystem values like wildlife and carbon, and being able to connect that as well to where are we seeing the largest risk of transmission from ignition to structures and buildings and communities, and infrastructure, critical infrastructure, kind of connecting all those dots and being able to figure out how do we prioritize? I mean, we like we said, we don't have enough resources to do everything that we need to do. How can we figure out how to work together to prioritize work where it's going to be effective? And we also know we don't have to treat the whole landscape. I think that's one of the good learnings that we've gained, that if we can treat a smaller 20 to 40% of the acres in that fire shed, that has 80% of the benefit for fire risk mitigation. So thinking about that and then looking across jurisdictional boundaries, we have to be looking across boundaries and empowering and enabling work across the board and with partners, and collaborating across the federal family is going to be really key. I think the other thing is around centering communities in accessing resources and enabling both the planning for an event, response and resilience during an event, and then long-term, both immediate, intermediate, and long-term recovery, and planning for future cascading disasters, watershed health, and potential future fire risk. We have to be looking temporally kind of across that whole line of work, and looking at it from a community-centered perspective of, we have all these resources at the federal level. Collectively, we have a whole bunch of capacity and resources and knowledge, but often it's really hard to navigate, and it's really hard to figure out how to get access to all of those resources, and when, and who's eligible, and at what time, and that also presupposes capacity. So thinking of flipping how we're thinking about it, and resourcing that differently and organizing it differently is going to be, I think, really important.
Mm-hmm. Anything to add to that? Yeah, I think that was another theme that's come out, is thinking about if we've had 3 presentations already that I can remember in this workshop, that fire is going to treat more to the landscape than anything else, So fire is inevitable. There is no future without fire. It's then we need to think about what happens after the fire and plan all the back engineer the planning to that fuels work, but also doing that fuels work in a way that's and this gets to Matt's concept of strategy, right? That you are connecting, you have connected reinforcing actions that go all the way to an endpoint strategy, which is a post-fire world that can recover for the next fire. And we don't have that, right? We have segmented and siloed pre-fire mitigation from fire response, from post-fire recovery. I think one of the proposals that I know has been entertained, and I provided testimony to the Senate Farm Bill hearing led by Senator Bennett, was to look at mechanisms like the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program or Joint Chiefs Program you already have that platform of collaboration. There's probably work to do in terms of building readiness for them to be able to do that. What sort of, is there thinking and thought process around kind of what are you hearing in the dialogue you're hearing about leveraging some of those existing collaborative programs?
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that because Ben's here, Lindsay's here. We've got leaders in the Joint Chiefs and the CFLR programs, and so that is going to be critical. There's multiple sources of investment across the landscape in terms of multiple benefits and risk reduction, and so how do we build on what we've learned over many years of being able to invest in that collaborative work and that cross-boundary work. So I think we do need to learn from that, and we need to think about what are those connected ways of looking. And then also, Kara's here. Some of us were a part of a post-fire workshop that happened in Denver at the Denver Water Board facility a few months ago, and that's very much a part of if we're looking at post-fire, we need to be looking before the fire and doing that planning ahead of time, and then also during response thinking about what are we anticipating in terms of treatments for recovery, what does that look like for watershed and soil recovery and community resilience and ecosystem resilience. So, and I got a chance to look at a number of the posters. I took a bunch of pictures. I have more questions for folks in the room, but being able, I think there's more that we're learning about what kinds of treatments on the front end have an outcome on the resilience on the back end. So being able to capture that learning and then incorporate it throughout so that we're not siloed in these different phases, we're actually working across to connect those phases.
That's great. Anything to add, Joan? Okay. I'm going to stop here again, and I want to get some feedback and guidance from those of you who, there's a lot of you that are involved in these collaboratives, and in what ways are you thinking? I know there's CFLR people here, Joint Chiefs people here, RMRI, Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative. To what extent do your conversations around planning, strategic fuels treatments, are you also integrating that post-fire landscape into that pre-fire planning? Anybody? Would that be a good idea?
I know we're at the end here.
Hi, I'm Tabitha. I'm on the Rogue River Siskiyou, and I'm going to just speak for my forest supervisor, Merv George, for a second, because he's a great guy, and if you haven't heard him speak about this, he's coined the term recently, ecological maintenance, which I think is a really good way to look at it. And we talk about restoration to what? The reality is we have to treat it. We're going to have to go back, pre-fire, post-fire. And I think one of the ways we're doing this, the Slater EA is the first condition-based management approach we're trying to take. Sorry. You guys are intimidating.
You're intimidating.
Touche, but it's really warm in here all of a sudden. But the point I'm trying to make is we really are trying to get to a place where people and the public recognizes that it's not a one-time fixes-all treatment. And so Slater, also Snowy Butte, is a project that we're working on right now with Medford Water Commission to really do that collaborative ecological maintenance for the long term. I know Merv would talk a lot about what the tribes would want to see replanted, which is going to blow a silviculturalist mind from a timber perspective. But it's something that we really need to be having that discussion before we go plant 1 million trees. You know, what do we want that landscape to look like in the long run, and how do we take care of the species that are living in the areas that are pristine habitat that are at the highest fire risk? And while I have the mic, it's at least some guidance. I'm a NEPA planner, but also in the CFLRP program. And I've worked for 2 federal agencies in the Northwest. One of our biggest bottlenecks is our cultural resource compliance. We just don't have enough staff. And I would love to see that law go under a little bit of modernization to open up to tribal people being more involved. Whether they have a degree in archaeology or not, they have a place in protecting those resources. So we need some help there.
That's
what
a
I'll
great
say.
suggestion.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's Aaron.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see you. Aaron Kimple with the Southwest Ecological Restoration Institutes. But I want to speak on behalf of actually the collaboratives of Southwest Colorado who have done a lot of work. And they're too humble to acknowledge, Danny, and Anthony over there. But down in Southwest Colorado, we have been fortunate to secure the Rocky Mountain Restoration Initiative and a CFLRP. In designing both of those programs, I think those collaboratives did a great job of thinking through key connectors. So thinking through transportation corridors, watersheds, and some of the essential power lines and infrastructure that was necessary. And have been really begin to map out how do we think about our treatment in sort of maintaining those key connectors post-fire. And so that means thinking about, this is a key transportation route. We are in these small rural communities. We have limited access over several passes that if that gets interrupted, we have supply chain issues. And then, you know, key infrastructure like power lines, where there's one power line to Pagosa Springs. And if that goes down, that's a huge issue for Pagosa. And then all the key watersheds that connect all of our small rural communities. So thinking about bringing the Department of Transportation into the conversation, thinking about if there is a fire in a key watershed, what kind of sedimentation ponds do we need, and then always those emergency exit routes. How do we get our community members out of these subdivisions that are set in this rural setting, forested setting? So I think, and I know a lot of people are doing it, and I know it's not just Southwest Colorado, but we may not necessarily recognize that we are having that thinking. We just need to be able to document and tell that story better. And so I want to give our Southwest Colorado folks and props for that, but acknowledge, and I think everybody should acknowledge where you are doing that and present that story.
Great. Thanks, Aaron. Well, we are sort of winding down in many ways. I could feel it in myself even. But so what I want to cap this panel with, first of all, a great thank you for making the time out of your busy schedule to hang out with us here in Fort Collins. We're really honored to have you. There's a lot of other places and people. I know you had budget briefings with the secretary. And I was like, where's Joan? She's supposed to be a part of this panel. I was like, well, she's briefing the secretary, for crying out loud. So thank you very much, and please join me in thanking Joan and Meryl. Thank you. I also wanted to cap, we're kind of then phasing out, and one way to do it is just be like, goodbye, you know, see you next time. But I wanted to sort of recapture a few tidbits that really stuck with me, and most of them came from Emily Homan, who I absolutely just adore for the work that she does, but also her ability to just sort of really crystallize how to approach and live with this daunting challenge. No one else is going to do this. There is no other entity that is dealing with sort of this resilience challenge when it comes to forests, watersheds, communities here in the West. You all are it, okay? And in some ways, that's daunting, right? That's intimidating. But I want to have you look around, right, of friends older than you, right, that you have laughed together, right? That's a signal of a good collaboration and good relationships. But you can also ask hard questions of each other and test the assumptions because you have a strength in that, okay? You do what you can with what you have, right? The big zeros at the end of these big dollar amounts seem really intimidating, but at the end of the day, you are all working with people and places, and you're doing what you can with what you have, and that's great. That's what you need to do. And you celebrate your success, and you forgive yourself for all of the work that is remaining. And so I just love that from Emily, and thank you very much for sharing that with us. I would also like to thank all of you for really leaning in to this workshop. Right? At the beginning, I said it's great for all of you to get together with all the people that you know, right? And talk to the people you know and get reacquainted. A lot of you haven't seen each other or don't get to see each other due to the pandemic and all these other sort of life changes. That's great, but also to get out of your comfort zone, meet some new people, ask questions, be open to learning. I know I've walked away with a lot of new ideas and thoughts and challenged my own assumptions, and I'm very thankful for all of you for doing that. So give yourselves a big round of applause for doing that work. And please complete the survey. Keep an eye out for an announcement for the next Swery workshop in 2025 somewhere in Arizona. And I want to wish you all safe travels and wish you all the best in your endeavors. Stay in touch. Keep in touch with each other. Take care of each other. And be well. Happy travels. Thank you.